I was born totally cross-eyed. I like to think that being born with this condition, which is called strabismus, made me a particularly introspective person, always kind of looking inward at myself. This picture is from after the corrective surgery I had as a baby, that, as you can see, is only half corrective. As a kid, I was pretty sensitive about my strabismus. The kids in my class couldn't always tell exactly where I was looking in the room, which, in retrospect, I should have just embraced as a cool, superhero type power. Strabismus girl, you never know where she's looking. I grew up in the analog era, many years pre-Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and I'm really glad for that because my parents didn't have an opportunity to post this picture of me online. 11-year-old me, let me tell you, would not have been happy about that. But times have changed. Today, many kids don't really have a say in the creation of their own online identities. They have the adults in their lives creating those identities for them, often from the very day they're born. Those identities are shaped and formed by others, which makes me pause to wonder, are they okay with that? Are we okay with that? My guess is that most people in this room have at some point in time posted a picture or content about a child online without necessarily asking permission. Maybe we didn't even think to ask, didn't even cross our minds. Maybe in hindsight, we regret that we did it. Maybe the kids in our lives really wish that we hadn't. But this really just brings up a bigger question about how we engage young people in meaningful ways in decision-making that affects their lives. So I spent almost 10 years living 230 miles above the Arctic Circle in Norway. While I was there, I fell in love with a treaty. This particular treaty is the world's most ratified treaty. It's called the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, or the UNCRC for short, or the CRC for even shorter. And I fell in love with the UNCRC while I was working as regional director with Save the Children, one of the world's leading children's rights organizations. I was fortunate during my 8 years with this organization to witness the incredible impact this document has on children all over the world. The UNCRC was adopted by the United Nations in November of 1989. It's made up of 54 articles that outline the rights that children have regardless of where they live in the world, their ethnicity and race, their gender, their religion, their language, their abilities, or any other status. And it also identifies how governments should be held responsible to make sure that these rights are upheld. Of these 54 articles, there's one in particular that has guided me in my work as a child advocate. Article 12 states that children have the right to voice their opinions and be heard in all matters concerning them, and for adults to take those opinions seriously. So in Norway, you can see Article 12 at work in myriad ways. There is a daily children's news program, nationally syndicated, that shares the news of the world in a child-friendly manner. There are question and answer sessions for young people and politicians, where young people can ask politicians the questions that they feel they have a burning need to have answered, and more importantly, so the politicians can listen to what's important to those kids. In 1981, Norway founded a children's ombudsperson position, a public official whose sole duty is to make sure that the laws and rights affecting children's interests are upheld and that Norwegian authorities follow the obligations outlined in the UN CRC. Some years ago, I was at a conference for children's rights advocates, and a city planner presented a really interesting project that she'd worked on. Together with architects, They were working on a building project in a part of town, and they decided that they wanted input from the local kids. So they invited the children in to do a mapping project. They gave them pens and paper, and they said, "Show us what this area is for you." And at the end of it, what they found out was really interesting. These young people identified places on the map that were not on any official map whatsoever, but were on the map that they created. There was a trail from an apartment complex kind of through a wooded area to the school. It was a shortcut. There was a hill that, although not on any official map, was there, and the kids used it as a sledding hill. And then there was a sort of open area adjacent to the school that was used after school and in the summer for soccer practice. And so the city planners and the architects decided to adjust their building plans ever so slightly so as to keep those areas intact. To put this in context, Article 42 in the UNCRC says that children have the right to know their rights. So you can walk into pretty much any classroom in an elementary school in Norway, 3rd grade, for example, and you can say, "Tell me about your rights." And the hands will go in the air, and they will say, "We have the right to education, we have the right to health care if we get sick, we have the right to shelter, we have the right to a name and an identity." And then, as always happens, someone will say, "We have the right to candy," and then everybody will laugh. So Norway has not only ratified the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, but they've taken it a step further and they've incorporated it into Norwegian law, which is something very few countries have done. Having this particular children's rights lens gives Norwegian children unique insights on empathy, responsibility, and global solidarity. As mentioned, this is the world's most ratified treaty. All United Nations member states have ratified it, except for one, the US. I visited the 9th grade classroom of a friend of mine at the high school that I attended in Duluth, Minnesota. She invited me in to talk to her very welcoming and bright 9th graders, and I just stood in front of the classroom and asked, "What do you know about children's rights, the UNCRC?" Blank stares, no hands in the air. And then something happened that often happens when you talk to kids about children's rights. The room gets electrified with energy. Let's harness that energy. Because the US is not just our government, it's all of us. And we don't have to wait for the UNCRC to get ratified on a national level. We can do our part locally. We could do it in our towns and cities. We can do it in our schools. We can do it in our businesses and our organizations. Because we still have this tendency to think of young people in terms of their future value. We should invest in them today because they will be the leaders of tomorrow. We hear that a lot. But they're leading right now. They're leading today. The question is, are we listening? They are, for example, leading school name change campaigns in the city of Minneapolis. They are designing TEDx youth events in Brookings. They're spending school nights every week of the academic year learning about community leadership in St. Paul. They're doing all of this. Together with young people, I want to start a movement to ratify Article 12 in our local communities. We start small, we start locally. As I've grown older, I decided just to embrace my strabismus. It's really just who I am. In the same exact way that Norway has embraced this children's rights framework, we need to follow suit here in the United States. We need to move from this just being an idea to embracing this children's rights framework and mindset as who we are here in the United States. Thank you.